Dim the lights, pour the tea, it's that time again, where the truth meets the vibe like a soulful friend. We ain't here for the surface, now we go deep, where the words heal hearts and the real ones speak. Let's talk it out and find out what it's really all about. We dive in, no doubt, turn the silence into sound, from pain to power, love to light. We unpack what keeps us tight. Let's talk it out and find out. It's that space where your soul can breathe.
Welcome. I know it's been a minute since I've been on here talking with you guys or giving you some insight on some topics, and my apologies. Life's been lifing. There's a lot of things going on. Life's just doing what it does. But I have been stewing on this particular topic for a minute, and I've had it in my back pocket for a while, and I think it's time to just kind of talk about it. And I kind of needed to get some time to experience some things or just kind of identify some behaviors about this particular subject or topic, because it was pretty new to me. But I'm going to reveal what it is. The title that I came up with is The Journey Beyond Arrested Development, Unmasking the Imposter. So today's topic is going to be built around arrested development, which I'll go into explaining what that is and what that entails or what it means. And it also talks a little bit about imposter syndrome. And these are two topics that, I'll be honest with you, I never really knew what they were. They're like so many new terms, in my generation, we didn't have all of these labels for things like, being on a spectrum and ADHD. And, now they have all these labels. We kind of had one label, and there's so many things that when people had certain behaviors, we kind of called it one thing, which I'm not going to say on here because I always get scolded about saying it. But, we kind of categorize people that rode the short bus as this, and it was like all inclusive. But needless to say, arrested development is something that is a true statement, but I just never heard it until I probably, within the last 5 years. So we'll go right in. We'll dig right in. And arrested development, basically, the general definition of it is a stoppage or delay in physical, mental, emotional, or social growth or progress. And it can be used in different contexts, but it refers to a condition where a person's development, whether it be mental or emotional, stops at an earlier age or earlier stage in their life. So a person might experience trauma that prevents them from emotionally maturing, or even a developmental disorder might cause, like a child, for instance, to reach expected cognitive milestones. So an example of that is something like, due to an early trauma, a person experienced arrested emotional development, like something has stunted their growth and their mind tells them to shut down. And young parents who are not mature enough to raise a child usually are the ones that, struggle because they are still learning and trying to learn themselves at that point. So from a social or to say metaphorical mindset or thought process, it can describe situations where growth or progress has stalled. But in psychology, arrested development often refers to a person who stops maturing at a certain stage due to trauma or neglect or other significant life disruptions. And this doesn't necessarily mean intellectual disability. It can affect emotional regulation, and that can be otherwise categorized as anger. Relationships, hurt, can cause someone to stop maturing. Impulse control, like that can encompass controlled substances or substance abuse. And self-awareness, which rightfully encompasses self-esteem or being aware of how you feel about yourself, whether it be body, mind, or soul. So an example of that is an adult who throws temper tantrums, struggles with accountability, or seeks constant validation. They might be emotionally stuck in adolescence, and that's what's causing them to have these tantrums or fits, or act in that state of mind. And even though they're fully grown, they don't really act like an adult or have adult behaviors. And some common causes of that is childhood trauma. There's plenty of that going around. People have it. Childhood trauma is one of the most common causes of arrested development, and especially in emotional, psychological, and relational growth. It can halt a child's natural development to the point of trauma, and cause them to carry emotional patterns or use coping mechanisms from that time into adulthood. And most times they don't even know that they are coping with something because it becomes a part of their everyday. Now, childhood trauma refers to an overwhelming, distressing experience during someone's formative years. And that means birth through adolescence. And that exceeds a child's capacity to cope. And it can be acute, which is just one single event that happened, or chronic, which is ongoing. And we know people that have lived in very distressed environments their whole life, and it's just caused them to have this thinking in their future life and their adult life. Now, common examples are abuse. It could be physical, emotional, sexual. Let's just keep it real plain. Neglect, it could be emotional or physical. And I always give the example of a baby who cries and never receives comfort. So I picture the baby in a crib crying loudly, and most likely they need a diaper change, or perhaps they're hungry, or maybe they just want to know if someone is there. There could be a number of reasons, but if the baby never receives the proper attention, it does not know what to do. And the result of that neglect births arrested development. Now, addiction or mental illness in the home can also kind of feed into that. And when a child grows up in a home shaped by addiction or mental illness, it creates an unsafe environment that deeply affects development. This can lead to arrested emotional, psychological, and relational growth. And even if the child appears mature for their age, on the surface, they still struggle with this behavior. And it comes out, obviously, in times when they are triggered. Addiction or mental health in the home is traumatizing because living with a parent or a caregiver who struggles with substance abuse or untreated mental illness can disrupt a child's stability, emotional safety, and attachment. And all key ingredients for healthy development can cause a child to adapt to chaos rather than grow freely. Mental illness and trauma in the household can do many things, but one of the things that it does cause is instability. Developmental arrest, which is another way to say arrested development, gets a person stuck. And there is no emotional regulation at this point. And I say children learn to suppress emotions or be hyper alert to caregivers' moods. And this is personal for me because I've dealt with my feelings about that in my childhood. And it made me feel a certain way about myself. And it also made me feel a way about others. But I was more in tune with what others needed and had very little awareness about how I felt about myself or what was good for me. So this was something that stunted my growth for years. I always say I didn't grow up till the latter part of my life. I was really behind the curve. So I was definitely under some type of arrested development, so to speak. And sometimes this particular mindset never allows you to develop a secure emotional baseline, and it leads to dysregulation in adulthood, which causes anxiety, disassociation, numbness, and or rage. But because we may have some influences as to what's right or wrong, we tend to use that as a base as to how we see things, which can lead to arrested development. Now, trust is a big part of that. So trust I associate with attachment, and a lot of times they go hand in hand. So if love and care are inconsistent or conditional, the younger self may struggle with trust, clinginess, avoidance, or fear of abandonment later in life. And this is something that I definitely have struggled with in my past, and sometimes even today, because my old thinking wants to reappear at times. So I continue to unlearn and reprogram my thoughts for better thinking. Now, people pleasing, sometimes you may know that something needs to play out, but you'll jump in and try to fix it so you can be Captain Save-A-Ho, as they call it. Well, my tribe calls it that. I don't know if y'all call it that, but realizing that some people need to go through the process so they can feel the burn and learn. But oftentimes we interrupt that process and abandon ourselves to fix their problem. And meanwhile, our issues go unattended. And it's something to think about because, in my opinion, that doesn't seem to be a good use of time. Simply because even after you do or say what it is you do or say for those people, they'll often revert back to the very thing you fought to keep them away from. And sometimes it can become a thankless process. Another area of unhealthy patterns is dealing with emotionally unavailable people. Now, most times these types of people are choosing to be this way. And you do have a percentage of people who are dealing with unhealed trauma that they don't know how to fix. Well, or what got them there. But let's talk about the percentage of folks that are aware that they are choosing to be stuck in this known dynamic. Most emotionally unavailable people are this way because it's their goal to punish others by not sharing the greater parts of themselves. And I can say I have met some folks who have some great things to offer, but refuse to share and the good things about who or what they are with others. Not understanding that people make the world go round. And that's a song. You know, those of y'all that know me, I relate everything to a song or tie it back to a song. And in fact, the song lyrics go, that's what makes the world go round, the ups and downs, a carousel. And proceeds to say, changing people's heads around, go underground, young man. And then the chorus ends with, people make the world go round. Now, I'm going to dissect that because this is a very relational song to the topic. And it makes sense. It's in theory, it makes a lot of sense. So when it says, but that's what makes the world go round, the ups and downs, the carousel, that means life is full of cycles, highs, lows, joys, struggles. The carousel symbolizes how life keeps spinning, often in repetitive or dizzying patterns. And it can refer to the emotional ride of human experience or the societal systems that keep turning, regardless of who's on or off. Now, changing people's heads around can relate to society, media, systems of power, and even economic forces and how they can confuse people. And they can also manipulate perceptions, distort priorities, or cause internal conflict. Now, it's a line about disorientation, how people are constantly being influenced, and often without realizing it. And this we see goes on with mostly our younger generation, and simply because they lack the experience to understand how to proceed in life successfully. And I'm not saying they don't know anything, but there pretty much ain't nothing new under the sun. And so if they listen, they'll be able to avoid a lot of heartache. And I can tell you that firsthand. So the lyric that says, go underground, young man, this could mean going underground and disappearing from public eye, laying low to avoid danger, exploitation, or oppression. And I can relate to this also because my thinking was when I would get into these thought processes of, man, I just need to stay away from that, or I would be in fear of how, the world was and where it was going. And being older, you see the progression of these things going downhill. And I would just say, if I just stay away from these things and people that made me feel uncertain, then I could avoid how it affects my feelings from day to day. And that way I can deceive reality and control the perception. And in some cases that could happen, but there are things you'll have to face head on. And this is something that I try to teach my daughter, like some things you have to have uncomfortable conversations and set boundaries. And then the song ends, people make the world go round. And that's the central truth of the whole song. People make the world go round. Because the bottom line is systems don't move without people. The fear of AI and all of that stigma that it brings, it's great, but it wasn't put in place by AI or by a robot. It was put in place by people. So those particular systems or that particular way of thinking or new technology doesn't move without people implementing it. So despite the chaos, corruption, or inequality in the world, it's human choices, labor, love, greed, and sacrifice that keeps the world spinning. And it's both a critique and a recognition of human power and responsibility. I'm a person that uses the art of song to understand people. Sometimes the writer of a song can be ambiguous in their thoughts, and other times it's something that you can directly relate to, just because the topic is so close to home. Now, this song is something that I hope we all can relate to because it explains a human element that we all sometimes struggle with, because we sometimes force other people's thinking within the confines of our own reality. And it just goes back to what I always say, meet people where they are and then decide whether they are someone who should have a place in your life. And if not, remove yourself so you can thrive in the right areas, but don't withhold your good gifts from everyone because of things that have made you feel inadequate. Now, the psychological effects in adulthood with arrested development are usually based on or centered around children who have been raised in environments that have hypervigilance, where people are always scanning for danger, difficulty trusting others, chronic guilt or shame, fear of failure or success, and or low self-worth, or even imposter syndrome, which we'll talk about as well in a few, or just the need to control or fix everything. And we can all identify with one or many of these. And substance abuse or perfectionism become a coping tool. Now, healing this type of trauma can be tricky. It is possible to grow beyond arrested development caused by addiction or mental illness in the home or in anywhere, wherever you grew up at. But it requires deliberate inner work. This is a journey that I have most recently been on, and I surprise myself every day when dealing with these situations, because the old me would have definitely took things too far and made everyone uncomfortable. But I choose peace over pain, and that seems to work out better for me. Practices for healing come in many forms, but there's a few that work. One of the things that, or a few of the things that I do, and I can share with you, is therapy is one of them, especially dealing with your inner child or trauma. I have a therapist that I talk with on a regular basis, and she tends to be my voice of reason when I'm thinking irrational. And then another way is to reparent yourself. Learn to give yourself what you didn't receive. Now, a lot of us tend to blame our parents for what they missed in life when raising us. When our parents raised us, what they feel that the parents missed. And as I am now a parent of a young adult, I noticed that there was no handbook or playbook with instructions in raising a child, and every child has their own nuances. I was having a conversation with my younger sister, who is in her late 30s, one day, and we were talking about how mommy was so strict and paranoid about everything, and she used to scream to the top of her lungs to get her point across. Now, back then, none of our parents knew about gentle parenting. So that's why all my generation have bad nerves and really don't like loud noises. But we now understand why she was like that. And it was simply because she was scared for us. You see, at the time, we were not privy to a lot of things going on in the world because some of us were sheltered. So when we finally got a taste of how people really were, it was foreign to us. And it made us defensive because we were not accustomed to that behavior. All along, our parents were trying to shield us from what they may have been through. But at that time, we thought we knew best. Well, that seems to be the consensus even in this day. But the difference in this day and in this world today is it's much worse than the one that I grew up in. Now, boundaries, they work as well. Learning to separate your feelings from others. We don't have to agree with how or what everyone feels about certain things, but we do need to have a level of respect for how others may feel about something. By communicating about how we feel, we may take away some of the unwanted feelings of being misunderstood. And thus, people know how far to go. You know, you train them on how far to go with you. And it's very necessary sometimes, because even people that know you, they can take things for granted. Now, I have a friend who grew up in humble beginning, and he had a lot of trauma in his life. When he became an adult, he was determined to communicate his boundaries because, as he explained to me, he mentioned the reason he has to do this is because certain things trigger him and send him spiraling and remind him of how he was mistreated in his life. And as a result, he does well with letting others know what's acceptable behavior and what's not. But he does not do it in a demeaning way, nor does he try to strip people of their dignity and integrity to get his point across. Because sometimes you can cause an even bigger problem when using this approach, because that approach can be a form of projection. Now, another way that you can practice healing techniques is somatic healing. Now, somatic healing involves reconnecting with the body and calming the nervous system. And some know that meditation is good for that. How I use that form of somatic healing. I wake up every morning and ensure I meditate on what I want for my day and what I don't want for my day. And of course, I pray. But sometimes if I'm overwhelmed, I can only really pray one or two lines, or say one or two lines of prayer and sit in silence so I can hear God speak to me. And what I realize is silence sometimes speaks louder than words. So growing up in a dysfunction can make you adapt to survival. And now healing becomes about reclaiming what got paused, and your joy and your trust in your voice uh, become a part of your dysfunction. Now, let's talk about how trauma arrests development. Trauma affects how the brain wires itself. When a child is stuck in survival mode, their development often freezes in the area most affected. Emotional regulation, trust, and identity, and even physical behaviors become a task. Now, trauma arrests development by disturbing the natural flow of emotional, psychological, and even physical growth. And it keeps part of our person frozen at the age or stage when the trauma occurred. And we know a lot of people like that. Like, you say, Jimmy never changed. Jimmy is still the same. Well, Jimmy never grew, right? And instead of growing through experiences, the mind and the body shift into survival mode. And those behaviors can sometimes come off as unstable, but they don't even know how to deal with it. So that's why I said you have to consider the source and understand what's going on before you pass judgment on a person, because you never know what walk of life or what their walk was. Now, here's how that happens across different areas of development. The neurological impact impacts trauma, especially in childhood, and can literally change the brain. A developing brain is highly sensitive to the environment. And so we have to understand how that affects the brain. And now the center of the brain can become overactive. And so it causes you to have a constant sense of danger or anxiety. And the prefrontal cortex, which is where you get your reasoning power and your decision-making power, underfunctions, and you become impulsive and sometimes even shut down. And that's where most young people are still developing this portion of their brain. So that's why a lot of them do things strictly on impulse. And the memory or the learning, or what they call the hippocampus, can shrink. And that brings brain fog, and it doesn't matter what age you are, or trouble focusing. So those things can affect the development of your brain, and it becomes a wired threat to your growth. Now, emotional development teaches trauma to a child that certain emotions are unsafe or unacceptable. And as a result, they may shut down their feelings to avoid punishment or rejection, which I did a lot. And then when you shut down your feelings, you don't develop them or learn to overfunction emotionally. And they do this by taking care of others more than they take care of themselves, or they get stuck in childlike emotional responses like tantrums, neediness, or withdrawal. And that's where we get adults who suffer from lack of emotional intelligence. And this eventually leads to emotional immaturity and an adult who may appear confident but lacks emotional regulation, patience, and or vulnerability. So in saying all that, we definitely need to look at patterns that arrest our development. And this is a term, like I said, that I talked through because as an adult, I felt like there was a lot of things in my life that I just did not know. And I was wondering how and when my thought process or my thoughts stopped. Where did I stop learning? Because I would meet people and I'd be like, how don't I know that? And they're younger than me. Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what age you are. You may have stopped growing in certain areas as your brain just was protecting itself. So we need to be conscious of that. And there's a lot of people that are not conscious of that. It affects us socially, and it makes it hard for us to identify where our development is at that time or how much we've developed. So trauma can freeze a child's sense of self, and that may make them lose touch with who they are outside of survival roles, or avoid risk, failure, or new things. And they can believe they're too much or not enough. So it's just so much confusion. And This stunts confidence, curiosity, creativity, and the ability to develop a stable identity. Imagine what some of us could have been in our lives if we didn't have all these arrested development issues. And a lot of times people have these issues and they role play it within themselves. And that brings us into the topic of imposter syndrome. This is another term that I wasn't very familiar with, but what it touches on is the ability to be something you're really not, right? Or pretend to be something you're really not. So it's a pattern where a person doubts their abilities, their talents, or their accomplishments, and they have a persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud, despite the evidence of their successes or competence. Like they're doing things where they are actually successful, but initially they thought they weren't that person. And it's especially common among high achieving individuals because like you're like, oh, he could do everything or she could do everything. But really and truly, they didn't believe they could do that. They just have to live up to a certain way so that people always believe that they are that way. And when they come home, they're usually like, I can't believe I did that because they don't believe it themselves. So common signs of imposter syndrome may feel like a person got lucky rather than earning their achievements or downplaying their successes or a constant self-doubt or comparison to others, fear of being found out or not living up to the expectation of others, overworking to prove their worth. And it can show up in different forms, like the perfectionist may feel like anything less than perfect is failure. The expert, as they call it, in this category, can feel like they never know enough. And even if they're highly skilled people, they're like, man, I'm not smart, or they just never know enough. The soloist believes that they must accomplish everything alone. And I'm guilty of that. I can relate to that. The super person pushes themselves to work harder to measure up to what I don't know. Because they're overachieving, and some people are not even looking at it that way, but they feel like they have to be the best person in the room or the smartest person in the room. And I always say, I always want to be in a room full of people who are smarter than me because that's how I learn. When I get in a room and I'm the smartest person, I feel like I stop learning at that point. The natural genius expects success to come easily. And if it doesn't come, they feel like a fraud. So anyone can experience imposter syndrome, regardless of gender, race, or profession. And it's especially common in unrepresented groups or in competitive environments. Now, reclaiming your confidence requires a certain mindset, right? So how you can do that is sometimes you would need to reframe your thoughts. Like you might say to yourself, I don't belong. And you can turn that statement into I'm learning and I'm growing. Or track your wins. Keep a confidence file of achievements and praise. It seems like a bit much, but it's something that sometimes people have to do in order to balance out that overachiever attitude. Talk back to your inner critic. Separate facts from feeling. Own your progress, not perfection. Success doesn't always require flawlessness. Speak up and connect. Community helps shatter imposter beliefs. So my motto is you pour, I pour, we drink. It doesn't have to always be on you. It doesn't always have to be on them. So some empowered mindset practices may involve affirmations. There's a lot of people who love affirmations. I'm one of them. They remind me of the positive things because we have so many negative things facing us in this world. But if we have something that tells us, hey, you can do it, or you're the better person when you do this, or just reminds us of those positive things, it puts us in a different mindset. Journaling is another way to work through those things as well. When you journal, you're able to write and reflect. I keep a journal of all my blessings that God has given me because sometimes I forget how many times God has come through for me. So it allows me to go back and read through all my blessings, and I date them and everything. And it reassures my faith in the fact that He'll do it again and again and again. And so we can celebrate small wins. And if we do it consistently, it'll help us to understand our growth. And it also helps us to identify the other areas we need to work on. Now, some of the root causes of imposter syndrome can be cultural or societal pressures like religious groups, perfectionism and high expectations, something that people pour into you or expect from you unrealistically, internalized messages that we carry through family or we were raised with, and we were told you have to earn that, and that's not always the case. Lack of representation. If you rarely see people that look like you, or you rarely have people pouring into you, you don't know what it looks like to have your own tribe, because it's necessary. Now, the shift from imposter to empowered, what does that look like? This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's a process of inner work, intentional self-talk, and boundary setting. So let me give you some contrast. An imposter mindset could say, I'm not good enough. But an empowered mindset would say, I bring value just by showing up. An imposter mindset would say, they'll find me out. But an empowered mindset would say, I don't need to be perfect to be impactful. An imposter mindset would say, I was just lucky. But an empowered one says, I prepared, I worked, and I earned it. Another one is, I shouldn't speak up. And an empowered side of that is, my voice has power and deserves space. So it doesn't have to be delivered with arrogance, right? But it defeats the purpose if you do it with arrogance. But it should be a means of healing or relearning your truth without negative impressions. So we can be mindful of that. It's just something that, to me, we didn't really have these definitions. Like, we were always told that, things were one thing versus another. And they were kind of set in stone in my day. But nowadays they have a name for everything. And I have to be like, what does that mean? What does that mean? And it means the same things that we know, but they just have a name. And I respect that. But, if you know, right? And you got to believe that you've always had the power. You've always had the confidence. It isn't something you need to find. It's something you uncover by letting go of shame, comparison, and belief that you're not enough. Now, the real empowerment comes when you stop chasing perfection and choose authenticity, because we all have an authentic side. We all were created differently. And that always amazes me, how God created us all differently. And we have some of the same characteristics, some of the same beliefs, but no one person is the same. Even twins feel different, have different ways. There's some slight difference. Now, my final thoughts on this subject is, we need to reclaim our confidence. And it doesn't mean you'll never doubt yourself again, because, like, we're imperfect. So we're definitely going to have those thoughts. But it means you'll recognize the doubt without believing it. You don't need credentials or permission from anyone. You just need more clarity, courage, and compassion toward yourself. So bottom line is, you already have what it takes. So it's just time to start believing it.
We unpack what keeps us tight. Let's talk it out and find out. Let's talk it out and find out.